Morning, everyone. The recent, perhaps it's not recent, maybe I'm just seeing it for the first time, but there's been a lot of videos put out by guys who are of a particular eschatological belief system where they believe, that the church goes through the wrath of God, and they basically downplay any other eschatological view as being a fabrication of 19th century dispensationalists, pastors, and ministers. And I wanted to just show that that particular presentation, and there's been several guys, it's not, and I'll tell you this, it's not anybody who is a serious student of theology, and if the guys wind up watching this video, that is not, shouldn't be taken as a personal insult, but just an observation. The guys that have a post-millennial view, who are serious theologians, recognize that there are scholars that, that these guys love Jesus just as much as you do throughout history, who are on all sides of this discussion. And so the serious guys, the ones I'm referring to are like Jonas Saller, and some others, they recognize their position is just one position. There are four. So, to tell people that your eschatological belief system is A, erroneous, and B, is a new creation when you clearly don't understand church history, you don't know church history, you haven't researched church history, you're doing a disservice to the Christian community. So what I'm going to do is show you some church fathers who were premillennialists. And I'm going to show you where they got it from. And then I'm going to tell you where to go look. Now, the sign of a scholar is they look at information. The information is what the information is, good or bad, right or wrong, whether it agrees or disagrees. It's just what it is. It's just data. And then you take that information as it is and you try to make it work with what you believe. And if it doesn't work with what you believe, then your beliefs need to be modified. When I started seminary in 2010, it was actually Bible college at that point, and then I went on to seminary. When I started in 2010, I was basically a new Christian. And as I learned, my beliefs changed. When I went on into seminary and into graduate studies in apologetics, and I learned what the ancients believed, my theology changed again. And it always got more nuanced and deeper and deeper and deeper to the point it is now. So what I'm going to show you is some of the church fathers, what they believed, where they got it from, and the fact that this presentation that I've seen 2 or 3 post-millennialists do, claiming premillennialism is a 19th century invention, you guys need to do yourself a favor, lose that presentation and delete it, because it makes you look foolish. And when I say that, I don't mean that in a bad way, in a insulting manner. What it means is you have latched on to some bad research, and because it fit what you wanted it to say, you liked it and you just ran with it. Okay, but whoever did that initial research either intentionally misread the church fathers or didn't read them at all. So now let's begin. We're going to go and we're going to talk about Eusebius. We're going to talk about Papias. We're going to talk about Irenaeus. We're going to talk about Polycarp. And we're going to talk about the Apostle John. Now, Papias lived from 60 to 130 AD. So Papias' life overlaps John's life, okay? And Papias is written about by the Apostle John. Well, not the Apostle John, by Eusebius, okay? Very little of, we have fragments of Papias' actual writings, but Eusebius had them in his day, and so he made copies and wrote down what Papias wrote, thankfully. All right, so Papias was the bishop of Hierapolis in Phrygia, which is Asia Minor, and he was a contemporary of Polycarp. So he and Polycarp lived at the same time. Polycarp was a disciple of John, and he presented a Kabbalistic tradition which has its antecedents in Palestine. Now, if you don't know what Kabbalistic tradition is, it's what is now called premillennialism. Okay? So, if any of you guys, if you're watching this, have read about Kabbalistic traditions, without realizing it, you read about premillennialism. Papias' dependence on the oral teaching of the apostles and elders has been documented by both Irenaeus and Eusebius. All right, Eusebius points out, Papias received doctrines of the faith that came from friends of the 12 apostles. That's Ecclesiastical History, Book 3, Chapter 39, Verse 2. Eusebius also says, it is worthwhile observing here that the name John is twice enumerated by him. Who's him? It's Papias. The first one he mentions is in connection with Peter, James, and Matthew, the rest of the apostles, clearly meaning the evangelists. Papias saw himself as possessing the teaching of the apostles. Eusebius writes, and Papias, of whom we are now speaking, confesses that he received the words of the apostles from those that followed them. That's the same book, chapter 39, verse 7. Irenaeus refers to Papias as a hearer of John. It's book 5 against heresies, book 5, verse 33, or chapter 33, verse 4. Papias had close connections with the Apostle John, and he had heard from disciples of John and the other apostles, and his oral teachings that were passed to him were the things he's writing about. So was Papias a premillennialist? It turns out that he was. Eusebius records that Papias believed things that came to him from an unwritten tradition and teachings of the Savior. Among these beliefs were, and here's where the quotation marks start, there will be a millennium after the resurrection of the dead when the kingdom of Christ will be set up in material form on this earth, end quotation. That is the book Ecclesiastical History, chapter 39, verses 11 and 12. Thus, with Papias, we have a case of a Christian who had close access to John the Apostle and was convinced that the kingdom of Christ was future and earthly. All right, now this completely is 180 degrees opposite direction from the postmillennial position. And this is a guy that lived from 60 AD to 130 AD. Now, let's move on to Irenaeus. Irenaeus was born in 130 AD, lived to 202 AD. He was born in Asia Minor, became the bishop of Lyon. As a youth, Irenaeus listened to Polycarp, who had personal contact with John and the other apostles. Irenaeus was not directly associated with John as Papias, but the historical connection through Polycarp is still significant. Irenaeus knew someone who knew the Apostle John. Now, if the disciples are the first generation Christians, Polycarp would be second. Irenaeus is third generation Christian. So with the case of Papias and Irenaeus, you have two men who had historical connection to John, who strongly affirmed premillennialism or Kabbalistic teaching. There are reasons that this belief system was lost. There are reasons for it. The destruction of Jerusalem is very, very prominent in the loss of this belief system. And you have to understand that with the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, even if these guys, they said, well, John said Jesus is going to come back and rule, wham, the temple's gone. The Jews are scattered all over the Middle East. I don't see how this is going to work out. So, even though they may have believed it, 200 years passes before Constantine comes to power. The church is persecuted heavily by Rome, Titian being some of the worst. They're getting killed left and right. Well, by now, they still think that they'll be in heaven with Jesus upon death. But setting up an earthly kingdom is the last thing on their mind. The churches are fragmented and scattered and are in hiding in most cases. When the Romans start persecuting the churches, some of the people would give up their writings. Remember, the Bible doesn't exist like me and you have right now. It's a bunch of loose leaf pages, a bunch of scrolls. The earliest books were called codexes. They were individual pages tied together with twine or whatever. They're called codexes. And those are a later invention of the 3rd century. They don't even exist when Rome is, Titian's going through trying to kill all these Christians. And finally, Constantine comes to power. He issues the Edict of Milan in 318 AD, which put a moratorium on killing Christians. Time goes by, Council of Nicaea takes place. Eventually, the church father Augustine comes along. Well, they saw, the imperial church a little bit differently than we see it now. And it's the imperial church. That's not the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church wouldn't exist for another 700 years. It doesn't come into existence till 1070 AD. Now, I know the RCC tries to tell you they've always existed. That's not the case. It's just not the case. History is a little bit different. So Augustine starts his writings. Temple doesn't exist. Augustine leans heavily on allegory. And if you've ever read some of Augustine's writings, you'll see what I mean. Everything means something else, and nothing means what it says. And while Augustine was an influential church father, I find myself at odds with Augustine on quite a few things. If you read his interpretation of the parable of the Good Samaritan, you will find out that nothing in those verses represents what words are used. Everything is a metaphor for something else. Instead of being a real life story that Jesus told. So, if you've never read Tony Nolan's book, The Hurt Healer, you probably should check that out. It's a very good study on the parable of the Good Samaritan and what me and you should do. Anyways, moving on down through time, you get to the Reformation and Calvin. Well, Calvin does nothing but copy Augustine's stuff. That's all he did. If you've read John Calvin, you've read Augustine. Everything's allegorical. Well, you move on down to modern times, and you know, if you've done any study on the Reformation at all, what you'll find out was the Calvinists, the Lutherans, became the magisterial church. What's the magisterial church? Well, they essentially are the Roman Catholic Church, just the, maybe you call them the RCC light, you know. But they ruled cities. The governor of a province could also be the head of the church. They killed other Christians for believers' baptism. Anabaptists means baptism again. What does all this have to do with the millennium? Well, it has everything to do with it. When you understand that everything starts with Augustine, that whole belief system starts with Augustine. It runs down through the Reformation and gets to America. The Anglican Church, you know, the Puritans tried to reform the Anglican Church. And when they saw that they couldn't reform the Anglican Church, they left in the 17th century and come to America to worship and however they wanted to. But they were heavily influenced by Calvinism. And so when you read church history, you study church history, you look at the progression of church history, and then you see a guy say, man, that stuff was invented, premillennialism was invented in the 19th century by a dispensationalist. No, it was rediscovered. It was rediscovered. There's a big difference. So, is premillennialism new? No. It's the oldest. The oldest. John held it. Why did John hold it? Because Jesus told him that's what it was. Dr. Daniel Aiken, president of the Southeastern Seminary, which is a Southern Baptist seminary at Wake Forest, he quotes, was it Matthew chapter 19, verse 28? He said, Jesus is a premillennialist. I probably believe him. I'm sure some won't. But at any rate, Tertullian held to a chiastic theology. Papias, Irenaeus, Polycarp, Eusebius. There's 5 right there. There's 5 church fathers. And if you believe what Papias said, he heard it from 3 other disciples of John other than Polycarp. That puts it up to 8. And he says they heard it from John. That's an apostle. It doesn't get any more authoritative than that. So, don't believe some of these presentations. These guys haven't done their research. Don't let them shake your faith. If you have questions, email me. My email is on the end of every video. If you have emailed me and I have not answered you back, it's probably because it went to junk mail. Junk mail filter caught it. So shoot me a message here on TikTok. Say, hey, I haven't seen your response yet. And I will go check my junk mail and see what's going on. But drop me a line and tell me who you are, what your question is, and I'll be more than happy to answer it. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and bring you peace.